Hello, my loves. Welcome to another episode of the With Love from Liv podcast. My name is Liv, and I love that you're here. Thank you so much for joining me today. On the podcast, I am for the first time opening up my space to invite a man in and give you some perspective from a male point of view. I have felt, throughout the last several years, especially, I have been trying to bridge a lot of the miscommunication between men and women. But obviously, I'm always coming at it through the lens of being a woman. So I have met with Duncan and invited him to come share some of his perspective. We'll ask him some dating questions. And from there, I'll just have him introduce himself. Duncan, please.
Hello, thank you for having me on. My name is Duncan Forbes. I've been in the fitness industry for over 10 years, and I've grown from focusing on the physical aspect to then the emotional to now part of the spiritual aspect at the same time. So I do train men and women, but for the past, I would say, year and a half, I'm starting to kind of expose myself to more of helping men with their physical activity, but also a little bit of their emotional and spiritual. Currently, right now, I do a men's Bible study group at my church. It's been probably the most empowering and fulfilling thing that I've ever been a part of. But
Amazing.
ever since being part of that group and going to a men's retreat that also changed my life, I realized that a lot more men actually need a little bit more support than people realize. So,
Fair enough. And you have worked with Connor Beaton, correct?
yes, I've actually went to his retreat, right? So, and he's helping me, giving me some good advice about what I should do for my own retreat as well too. Him and his staff has been incredible. Ever since I did their events retreat, they've actually helped me kind of give me some other pointers on what to do moving forward so I can take the reins.
That's really incredible. I am a longtime fan of Connor Beaton. I think he does really incredible work with men. And I think it's amazing and probably, honestly, a relief to a lot of my female listeners that there is this grassroots kind of revolution in the men's community, trying to improve and grow. And of course, as always, this space is for everyone, and whatever your belief systems are, we're never here to tell you how to believe, but we are open to encouraging everyone to find a relationship with themselves, with a partner, and with a higher power. So, with all of that, I want to just kind of hear from you as a single guy, right?
Hmm.
And specifically getting into this space, working with men. What is one thing that you feel like is being miscommunicated, misunderstood, misconstrued about men right now in our society that you would like to share with women, that you would like to more or less set the record straight on?
Hmm. For my personal experience in the men's group that I lead, but also the men's retreat that I went to, and just some personal things. I would say that what is misconstrued is that men actually want to be better. At the end of the day, we can come off a certain way too, but I think in today's society, when it comes to understanding gender roles, it's totally different these days than it ever was before. And I think it's hard for men to actually understand where they can insert themselves in a fulfilling relationship. I think a lot of men ask for help when they get to the point of, uh, you know, of no turning back. When I know a lot of other, women specifically, they do a great job for preventative, thought processes too. But that is from my standpoint.
Okay. And so just gonna dive into that a little bit
Hmm.
because a lot of the women, specifically that I work with, are high powered, type A, get things done type women.
Hmm.
And a lot of them are operating predominantly in a very hyper masculine energy.
Hmm.
And I, of course, talk a lot about finding softness, creating space for that feminine energy, and creating a space for men to come into your life and to have a place. Um, However, that of course can't be entirely up to women to do. So, what do you think you would like to see men start doing to, I don't know, show women that they want to be part of their life, and to show women that inviting him into her life and into her space will expand her experience, instead of, I know a lot of women are afraid it will, kind of shut them down or shrink them. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say right off the bat, for your audience, for a woman that's looking for something in someone, the first thing that they should probably look at is what type of self development that they technically do. And it starts with being part of a community. Now, that community could also just be sports related, could also be religious related, and so forth. But ask him what is that community like for him and see how he actually explains that community. Because the people that you hang out with, right, the quality of your life depends on the quality of the relationships that you have.
Hmm.
So for me, in order for me to be a better version of myself, I started to think outside of the box and start hanging out with different people. Now, at the end of the day, there are relationships that I still have with people who've been in my life throughout the entire time. But, I've started noticing that there are other relationships that I'm starting to build because I'm at a different phase in my life. So,
Okay. And so what kinds of men's groups do you think have the greatest impact on men? Like specifically for a woman who's dating and
mhm.
getting to know a guy, um, what are signs that she can look for?
Whether or not the man is hanging out with, it could be a mix between married men, right? Or what type of single men that they're hanging out with too, and where that they're basically hanging out with. The men's retreat, we went all the way up into the middle of New York, right, at this beautiful mansion, cut off from, talking to anybody. But it really gave the opportunity for a man to look at his issues straight on, right? And to literally look at that mirror and be like, I have nowhere else to go but myself and the people around me.
Hmm.
You would also probably want to ask the prospect, I would say, right? What do they do when it does come into hard situations and how they handle hard situations too?
Hmm.
Uh, there's so many ways that I could say, like a man, what are the top qualities of a man? But obviously, each person has different values.
Right.
But with what you said before, in terms of having that masculine energy, who do you trust that you can actually let that feminine energy come into play at the end of the day, right? And building trust will take time. And I think right now we don't necessarily give each other grace to build that trust because it's very it can be the term trust, right, is probably more powerful than the term love itself. I would say love is the foundation of a lot of things, but I think in today's society, trust is very overlooked. And in order to build trust, right, trust can actually, it's like a Chinese plate, right? Like you can keep on rebuilding trust here and there, but all of a sudden there's only so many pieces that you can actually like put together.
Yeah.
So what activities is a man doing to be a trustworthy man, right? What
Mhm.
environment is he doing? Um, where is he hanging out? And you could obviously say like hobbies and everything like that, but at the end of the day, if he's able to come out of like hard situations, then it's more likely for that man to be able to come out of a hard conversation with you, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and asking men what are they doing to build that trust in and with themselves. I think that's huge. Um, so in this time, you mentioned, with gender roles and things are changing a lot. Um, I want to ask you because, historically, we have viewed marriage through this lens of basically, um, this is where we set up a family. This is how a woman can like be taken care of, and so there's been a lot of, I think, um, inappropriate um, like conflations with certain terminologies, such as um, being the provider is
Mm,
tied to money, right? And
mm,
as we have seen this big shift in women
mm,
working and women providing for themselves, owning their own homes, and and even in marriages becoming the breadwinner, I think that has left a lot of women confused and maybe even resentful about the role of men
mm,
in their relationship because they're coming at it from a place of, well,
mm,
I make my own money. I can buy my own house. I have my own car. I am completely self-sufficient, self-sustaining.
mm,
What do I need a man for?
mm.
Which is the title of this podcast episode, Men,
Of
What Are They
course,
Good For?
of
Um,
course.
so what would you to say to those women?
I would say, first off, that's beautiful that they have found the ability to provide for themselves, right?
Love that.
Everybody, everybody should have the ability to provide for themselves because in society now, right, everybody should have an equal opportunity to do whatever, to be whoever, and so forth. I think now, though, right, maybe the title of this podcast would be, are women asking too much or are men not stepping up to the plate now, right? I think with this major change, men would probably have to grow their emotional and relational intelligence and competence to walk beside their partners. Back then, being a provider, there wasn't necessarily, an emphasis on making sure that we can be more relatable and have better communication with our significant others. But because from from what I see, right, I think men haven't had the time just yet to grow as fast as women have grown in terms of their support communities at the same time. I think with the opportunity for women to have these support groups for many years, right, and to discuss ideas, right, to discuss issues and so forth. Men really haven't had that, you know, back then in my life. My dad didn't even have that too. But the good news is, like, I hope to be that example that men are trying to step up to the plate, right? And not just be a provider, but also be a partner,
Hmm.
right? And if we haven't noticed, we are living much longer, right? And if we're living much longer, that means that there will be continuously change in the layers that both of us will be continuously, just shredding off that need to have different types of conversations.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I think I actually hadn't even put that together.
Hmm.
That, yeah, like when men were sought after, for better or for worse, for their ability to financially provide, there wasn't a need for them to be more emotionally available because their role was money, right?
Hmm.
And now in this time where we're actually, I think love matches is like the most appropriate term for this modern dating world, where we're no longer getting married out of necessity, out of fear, out of
Hmm.
scarcity, but because we have so much available to us, we are looking for someone who is more emotionally compatible with us and more compatible with
Mm.
value systems. And
Mm.
and if you don't know this, and this is for not you specifically, for the
Hmm.
audience, divorce is on the decline. we're
Mm-hmm.
actually seeing less and less married people getting divorced. So it's been, about 50% or so. And it rose, I think it was at 51 or 52% around like the 80s. And it has steadily declined. I think now it's at more like 46% or so. Um, and I think that that's really a beautiful thing
Mm-hmm.
that we are connecting on a deeper level and beyond the necessity of, can this man, buy me a
Mm-hmm.
home, and can this woman bear my children, and
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of very almost primitive ways to put it, but that is what
Mm-hmm.
marriages were for a long time, right? They
Mm-hmm.
were to solve a problem and
Mm-hmm.
to, you know continue
Mm-hmm.
the population, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think, at the end of the day, back then, religion provided social structure, right? A man should do this, a woman should do this. But over
mhm,
time, as we've evolved as a species, right, and there's just more opportunity for both genders, like everything becomes a little bit confusing at the end of the day. And that's why it is important for both male and females to grow mentally and emotionally and spiritually at the same
mhm,
time, right? It's just going back to your first question with that you asked in the podcast, right? With technology, it is so easier for men to try to reach out to someone and then get denied, but not really get denied through a dating app, right?
mhm,
I think I talked to you about before I came onto this podcast, there's just more research that ages between 18 and 25, 50% of them have not gone up to a woman to ask them out on a date. So in
mhm,
terms of building that rejection ideal, in terms of building that perseverance, right? Men can take the easy way out and go onto an app and try to reach out to someone, right?
mhm,
So I would say, technology is actually against us rather than for us
mhm.
because right now we all look for chemistry, but right now chemistry is being manufactured by this artificial intelligence that's happening between the apps. A lot of people don't realize, but now since artificial intelligence is becoming part of Match, of Plenty of Fish, of Bumble, both sides are creating profiles based on artificial intelligence ideas. So what
Mhm.
that means is it's no longer authenticity that people are connecting to. It's their two artificial intelligence profiles that are talking to each other. And that's why there's just more confusion and then there's less connection at the end of the day, right? So technology, as much as it's making easier, as we think it's making easier, it's actually making it much harder for us at the end of the day.
Interesting. Okay, so you are against dating apps.
I wouldn't say I'm against dating apps, but I would say it's not necessarily, and I've known a lot of people to meet their significant others. It is a little bit harder, right, to meet people these days, especially as you get older.
Yeah.
But in terms of, for a man, building confidence, and in terms of understanding the difference between chemistry and compatibility, right, and connection, right, you would be able to understand those three C's when you are out and about meeting people rather than behind the app too. The app allows people to give the least amount of effort to getting to know somebody,
Yeah.
right? Like at the end of the day, it's you put one toe in and the rest of the body out, right? Like, and it's sad for society to be like that, especially if we want to build not just successful but fulfilling relationships. It is sad about that. But at the end of the day, like that's what it is right now.
Hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think like I wouldn't say I'm against dating apps. Um,
Yeah.
when I was single, I was on them kind of in and out. Um, I think that I think that they are specifically ineffective for high performing individuals,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so low investment.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is
Mm.
probably the number one
Yep.
thing that,
Yep.
I am working predominantly with high achieving, high net worth women. Um,
Hmm.
and they are like, every time I'm like, hey, do you want to check out a dating app? They're like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I get it. I get why. I think that they can be a useful tool, and I have seen it work out for people. But I think that specifically for the high performing community, um, they just don't work because of what they are, right, on
Hmm.
their face. So with that, as I work with my clients, the number one thing that I hear from them is, well, I don't know where to meet men. I
Hmm.
don't, like, I feel like I never get approached on the street, and I want that organic meet cute. Um, and I don't know why it's not happening for me. And I have, worked with them at length on the energy piece, which I have a separate question for you about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but my first question is, what would you say to those women? Where are these high performing women to go to meet high performing men who are doing the work?
I would definitely say during day activities over the weekends at the end of the day. I mean, you could definitely meet them at a bar, which is like the usual place to meet them.
Yeah.
But I think for active men, it goes back into values, right? Like if you want to meet somebody, if you want to meet someone athletic, go to a sports event, right? Or go to a local community event to
Mm.
do that. If you want to meet somebody that, really cares about food, go to a cooking class, right? Like it's all about putting yourself out there, especially with like the men that are in my study group. They
Mhm.
tell me stories about how they met their wives too. It's just at these random places at the end of the day, and that's probably the first step, at the end of the day. And obviously go with a friend, right? If you go with like I would probably say like more than like four women, it can be a little intimidating for a guy to do that. But hey, if a man comes up to you while you're with your three other friends, I mean that shows confidence at the same time, right?
Mhm.
But I would definitely say those type of events, even maybe coffee shops at
Mhm.
the end of the day too.
Yeah.
And it might sound like duh, but if they really want to meet someone in real life, probably just different run, the new term run groups, right? Like I'm sure people have seen that like on TikTok, right? But there is some truth to that at the end of
Mhm.
the day. Um, but it's kind of hard because it really is individual, for everybody.
Yeah.
I take pride in my health, so I do a lot of health related activities,
Mhm.
hiking, playing soccer, any type of like gym events, 5Ks, but that really depends on the individual at the same time. So the good thing about technology these days is like you can go to an Eventbrite and you can look up, a certain event that you wish you could go to with somebody, but you're going to go by yourself. Put yourself out there, right? That would probably be my piece of advice.
Amazing. I love that. So I hope everyone took notes. Look up Eventbrite, start looking up groups, do all of those things. And I love the social and like unrelated to work aspect of that. Because I think a lot of high performing singles specifically do get so wrapped up in their work and their job as if it's their whole identity. And I think that that works a lot against a lot of singles as well.
Hmm.
But my other question for you that's kind of attached to that
Of course.
is, so I as I speak with my clients, and we're specifically working on the concept of opening them up and tapping more into that feminine energy when they're just out living their day to day when they're thinking about dating and doing their non-job related things, because shifting into different energies and different environments, I think, is a skill set, right? um, and my theory here, and you can tell me what you
Yeah.
think of it as a man, is that men are, whether consciously or unconsciously, seeking women who are open to sex. And I don't
Hmm.
necessarily mean, oh, I see this woman, I'm going to try to get with her immediately. I just think that there is kind of in the wake of the sexual revolution, um, there
Yeah.
has been a almost the pendulum swing to the other side of just like, I am closing myself off to all kind of connection, all kind of marriage, all men. My life is better off without them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that closed offness has created this sense that to men, these women will just never let them in. And at some point, they may sleep with them, but like in general, it's not going to be that connected intimacy that creates a family. Like, does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Absolutely. I would probably kind of have to agree with a woman that abstained from sex for a while, not to just challenge the other man, but to really show how to build, how to make love without making love. That
Yeah.
is probably the most powerful thing that a man needs to realize these days,
Mhm.
right? And through Connor Beaton's work, right, him and his team, what they coach, right, is discipline when it comes to, sex, when it comes to porn and so forth like that, right? Like sex should not be a transaction in a
Mhm.
relationship or a marriage, right?
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important than ever for a man to understand what sex is in the first place, right? You can go from biblical standpoint, like the sex is like, becoming one, with the higher being too. And it's a beautiful thing, but I think society, we take it for granted a lot. And people get hurt, you know, not just women, but also men at the same time, right? So abstaining from that type of intimacy,
Mhm.
if they want to do it, absolutely, right? It might deter a man to move away from that, but that means that's just a man that's not right for you, like at the end of the day, So it's again, it's like totally individual. But if a man truly cares about your well-being, right, he will want to be with you, not just because of the intimacy part,
Mhm.
right? It's also because you are the best friend that he has ever had. You
Mhm.
are the person that he trusts with his life choices, right? Like that sexual, physical intimacy is just the cherry on top.
Yeah, and I think my question is more so, um, does it seem um, like women have closed themselves off, where we're not, I'm not even specifically talking about sex. I'm more talking
Mm,
about that openness to deeper intimacy.
mm,
Like, is that something that you feel like women are closing themselves off to
mm.
these days?
So, not in my study group, but in my group that I went with for my men's retreat,
Hmm.
there are some single men that do kind of feel like that at the
Hmm.
end of the day. Um, and it could be a couple of things because women don't want to get hurt, right? Who wants to risk themselves? Who wants to be vulnerable these days? That makes
Of
total
course.
sense, right? So I would say there's definitely some situations where I've noticed it.
Hmm.
So yes, I would say that from a man's perspective.
Okay. Great. I'm going to keep working on that theory. I think there is a lot to unpack there, that would help both men and women, but there's still some more exploration, I
You
think.
know, and I agree with that too. It can come from a place of they do not want to get hurt. And
Hmm.
in some ways, it could mean I still have power over you because I have not shown that side of myself.
Yeah.
So it can be looked by like two different viewpoints at the end of the day. But as we continuously build these walls, continuously build these boundaries, right? Yeah, I think the term boundaries have been just very interesting these days, right? Like if we think of boundaries, and it could be like a physical boundary at the same time.
Mhm.
Back in the day, before even any type of like revolution, like in tribal communities, you couldn't really tell our neighbors or our family that we needed boundaries. And now we need boundaries more than ever, right? So I would say yes, there plays a crucial role in boundaries to see if that significant other can respect them,
Mhm.
right? And what their needs are. But also at the end of the day too, like we can't just continuously build up these walls with each other just from time to time. Like it's, from my personal belief, it just makes it a lot harder to build any type of relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I do think that that the way that boundaries are taught and understood right now are actually an exercise in control,
Mm, yep.
and in controlling the people around you. And we have, at this point, weaponized boundaries
Mm,
to control the people around us. And I think that it has created so much isolation, loneliness, severance of familial connections, and basically a major barrier to intimacy, period, right?
hmm Yep.
So, yeah, I think that probably needs its whole own podcast episode. But
Of course. Absolutely.
I am so grateful for your time, for your willingness to come on and talk with me and talk with my girls
hmm
and share some outside perspective. Um, Before I let you go, is
Of course.
there anything else that you want to share with my listeners who are, just to reiterate, high performing single women looking for connections and just kind of struggling in this changing society?
Yeah, I would say to your listeners that men are trying. They might take a little bit longer, but they are trying. And I would like to be the first guy to be an example of that, right?
Mhm.
And even though for the men that are trying, if they are still not the one, they will still respect the time that they have with you so you can continuously find your person at the end of the day.
Mhm.
But in a world, I mean, depending on like where you live, the city is totally different, right, compared to like rural areas. But questions, the type of questions that you ask and the type of questions that men ask can really dictate where they are in terms of their emotional and relational intelligence, right? Because at the end of the day, you're high performing women, they want to get to a point of trust so they can allow themselves to be themselves. But
Mhm.
that depends on the questions in the first place. And that over time depends on what happens during the crucial conversations that you and your dates or your significant others basically have.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing
Of
that.
course.
If any of my listeners want to give you a follow or connect with you deeper, is there a best place to send that?
Yep, they can look at my Instagram, underscore the man above underscore again. That would be the first one. And if they wanted to follow any type of like fitness, nutrition tips, because I definitely focus on that too, ufit underscore Duncan C. Forbes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Thank you for chatting with me. And thank you all for tuning in and listening. I love you, and I will talk to you soon.